sponsor, Manscaped.
Uh-huh.
Have you tried the new equipment that's been sent?
I'm afraid because it says weed whacker. I'm scared.
Maven, Manscaped. What are you thinking about
Love
Manscaped, dude?
Love it.
What do you use it for?
Necessity. What don't I use it for? Put it this way. The only hair I have on my entire body is these eyebrows.
Yeah.
That you see. These caterpillars racing to the middle of my nose. That's it.
That is it.
That's all I have. And that's all I want.
That's the
Manscaped is a must.
We were talking before the show. There's nothing worse than just hair.
Yeah.
Right? Hair on a woman, hair on a man. It's just bad. Absolutely.
And it's the one thing that the older I get, it starts growing more in unwanted areas.
Absolutely.
I hate it.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
Just going to go out there.
Oh, boy.
Go for it.
You're doing a deed.
Yes.
Again, I don't want you to have to admit this because we, as men, we try not to admit this. But if you're going to go do the deed on a woman, would you rather have her be hairless or a little hair, racing stripe, or
racing stripe,
full retro bush?
Racing stripe.
Retro bush is out.
Yes, thank you.
Retro bush is out.
Yeah.
I don't mind a small, well manicured landing strip. Every now and then, if it's completely, and I'm talking like baby's ass bald, then I start. Where is that pedophilia line? I don't want to wander into that.
That's very interesting. I never thought about that. You're a smart dude. Holy shit.
So if the landing strip is clean enough for the plane to go in smoothly, you're cool with that?
If the landing strip has, like I said, well manicured, you can see both sides. It's not
like blinking lights on both sides of that.
I don't want, I don't want the shrubbery going off into unwanted areas on that as well.
Gotcha. Oh, look what you found. Ooh.
I got to be all honest though. Hey, the older I get though, I don't think I can be as
I found it.
Have you ever gone down there and she slowly brings down the underwear? Then
what is
retro? Absolutely.
You're like, whoa!
Wow!
Yeah, I'm 46.
Like it pops out.
Do you walk out or what do you do?
No, I muster through. I muster up the courage to get
He's
through.
a trooper. Yeah, he's a trooper. Got to give him an A.
Not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah, I hear you. Listen, I couldn't say. Well, if you have the same beliefs as Maven, does Manscaped could help you?
Absolutely.
The weed whacker.
Absolutely.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that I may have to, go in a room, close the door, and hang out with the weed whacker for a little while.
Yeah, I think you're a retro guy, aren't you?
I like 70s adult films, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
but with that, we're going to take a quick
Batman.
commercial break, and we'll be back with this wrestling icon, Maven.
We will see you in a drop kick second.
Drop kick.
Yeah, because there's a point of origin to everything important that we see on screen today. So yeah, go on.
And us just being fans, and again, we'll never say anything more than that. It's always amazing about guys like yourself who have meant so much for the industry. Not saying you're not in the forefront, but you're when mainstream wrestling, it's like Joel Goodhart is known from a lot of the insiders and an iconic figure, but maybe to the casual fan, Joel may not be such a household name. Would that be a fair description?
That's absolutely fair. It's the way I wanted it.
Well, can you elaborate on that?
Wow. Yeah, to me, the promoter is behind the scenes. The promoter is out front at certain areas. When I used to do my shows, I did some of the ring announcing. I was on the radio, so people knew who I was. But the reality is that it's the boys, it's the workers, it's the boys and the girls in the ring that make the show. And I always wanted to be behind the scenes more than in front. Even now with this big show that I'm doing on May 3rd, we're promoting everybody on the show, including the referees, and including the ring announcer. But we're not promoting Joel Goodhart. And it was something I always rather be below the line instead of above the line.
So Joel, for someone who may not know you as well as others, how did you become a professional wrestling fan, and then how did you become such a polarizing figure in the industry?
Well, for one thing, I was always a fan and still a fan. I grew up, my father took me to the matches at the Market Street Arena here down in Philadelphia. and I saw Bruno Sammartino, and I saw Spiros Arion, who was my guy. I was always I liked the heels, and Spiros Arion was the guy I always liked to watch. But I grew up in the matches. Anyway, long story short, I'm in the financial services business. I've been doing it now for April 1st. It'll be 49 years. And I get a phone call from one of the accountants I was working with way back when. And Bruce happens to say to me, I have a client I want you to go see. They want to talk to you about some insurances, etc. So I go out to see Carmella and Paul Panfil. And anyway, long story short, Carmella and Paul and myself hit it off. We're the ones that started the Squared Circle, the wrestling store that was the wrestling store before other wrestling stores were around. We started Wrestling Radio. We started, I mean, we didn't realize it at the time, but we were breaking history. Anyway, Paul says to me after one of my appointments, he says to me, by the way, if you ever need tickets for anything, Broadway show, concerts, whatever, I have contacts to go get good seats. So I said, okay, I'll keep that in mind. If I ever need a ticket, I'll give you a call. A couple of weeks later, he calls me up and he says, what are you doing Saturday night? And I said, nothing. I was separated at the time. I said, nothing specific. He says, you want to go to the wrestling matches? I said, sure. Well, this is when the NWA was coming to Philadelphia. And I went with Paul to the matches. And sure enough, he got front row seats. I don't know how he pulls it off, but he gets front row seats. And we watched the matches, and we watched the Road Warriors. We watched the Rock and Roll Express. We watched Ric Flair, Magnum TA. I mean, I can go down the names. And I go back about 2 or 3 months in a row with Paul in the front row. And one time I'm sitting on the front row, and there's a guy walking around the ring in a suit and tie. And if you're a wrestling fan, you realize anybody wearing a suit and tie doesn't fit. So I happened to go up to the guy, and I said, look, you look like you're important. Who are you? And he says, my name is Elliot Murnick. I said, okay, and who are you? He says, well, I'm the promoter. I'm Crockett's right hand. I'm the eyes and ears for Crockett here in Philadelphia. So I said, okay. And he says, well, do me a favor. You doing anything later after the show? I said, no. He says, well, why don't you come back to the Marriott? Now, I was one of those guys. I had no clue about the Marriott in Philadelphia. I didn't know what the hell he's talking about. I go there. There's 300 people. They're all wrestling fans. There's 300 people there. They're waiting for all the wrestlers to come back from the matches. Anyway, I meet Elliot Murnick for a drink, and I don't drink, but I have a Diet Coke, and he has his whatever he was drinking. And we sit and talk, and we struck up a friendship. 2 or 3 months of this going on, he then says to me, I have a question for you. Do you ever think about getting into promoting? And I said to him, well, Carmella and I had promoted a couple of shows with Dominic DeNucci. It's not something that really took off for us. But he said, well, I need a set of eyes and ears in Philadelphia for me, meaning for him. Well, he lived in North Carolina, and he would drive his boat up the Atlantic Ocean to Philadelphia. He'd never take a plane, never took a car. So he needed somebody more local. And that's how I got into the promotion end of it. I started working with the NWA. I started doing ring announcing for them in Philadelphia instead of Gary Michael Capetta. I did the matches. I got to know the guys in the back. I started to do the Squared Circle. We started having lunches. We started having lunches when Carmella was involved. Carmella and Paul decided to get out of the business. Smart move that they made. And I decided to continue with it. Started having lunches, had the guys come in, got to know them all. And one thing led to the other. And now the story about how I got into promoting and creating the TWA, it's a whole nother show into itself. But that's how I got involved in the business.
Amazing. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Where does we all go back in, especially in my philosophy in life, we all go back to the point of origin. Where does the idea to be the company that becomes the beginnings of what we eventually knew as my personal favorite, I'm on record for it, company, ECW, where does the ideology of that come in? Who comes up with the, our presentation is going to be more brutal than you've seen in the past, because without what you did, I don't think that eventually there's an ECW. I do believe in a point of origin, and that's where it was occurring. So where does that start?
Well, you're looking at it. It's right in my head. In fact, I'm. You can actually quote me on this. Todd Gordon wrote the book Todd is God. Well, if I created Todd and Todd is God, what's that make me? Okay.
I suppose as no one knows as Moses.
Okay. Well, the long story short is when I created the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, which again just grew and grew and grew. But once I created the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, Bill Apter, one of the magazine guys, Bill Apter gave me all the credibility I needed. The day I announced the TWA, the formation of the TWA in the ring, and I brought out the new TWA heavyweight belt. As I'm walking out of the ring, Bill Apter comes up to me and says, PWI is going to recognize the TWA. And every month thereafter, the TWA was in the magazine, the top 10. We had our rankings. We created, in my mind, I was always and still am always a fan. I did matches that I wanted to see as a fan. Didn't sell me a single ticket. I mean, I had one match, Adrian Street against Jimmy Valiant. I always wanted to see Adrian Street live. I used to trade tapes. I used to watch him on the tapes, watched him in Georgia. The Georgia feud that he had with Jimmy Valiant was unbelievable. And the one thing I learned about Adrian Street is he never came north of the Mason-Dixon line. And I had to bribe him. And I won't get into details as to how I did it, but I got him to do a show for me. And that match was the third match on the card. It didn't sell me a single ticket, but as a fan, I wanted to see Adrian Street, and I did. I wanted to see the original Sheik go up against Abdullah the Butcher. I brought that. I wanted to see Terry Funk against Jerry Lawler, the AWA belt versus the NWA belt. I brought that into Philadelphia. And I brought the big names in, and that's what got the magazines involved, because rather than the magazines having to travel to Texas and Pacific Northwest and Florida and Memphis, they could just come down to Philadelphia. All right. So I got the big names, but the real key to the TWA isn't the big names that I brought in. It was the development of the local talent and the Larry Winners and the DC Drakes and the Johnny Hotbodies and the Tony Stetsons and the Jimmy Janettis and the Glenn Osbornes and the Sandmans and the JT Smiths. I created it all. Okay. And it just, to me, those matches were the best matches on the show. They didn't necessarily sell the tickets that the big names sold, but those matches were without question. You watch them today on YouTube. Those matches were unbelievable. They were as violent as they could get. We had people being thrown off of balconies before New Jack ever did it. We had people thrown out of sports bar. We had tables and chairs. It was unbelievable. I used to have a saying that if you came to a TWA show, everybody at our show had a front row seat at some point during the show.
Wow.
Okay, that was my philosophy. Now, today with insurance restrictions, we're somewhat limited about what we can do. But the reality is that the Attitude Era started right up here. Okay, and I didn't realize it at the time. When I folded and Todd Gordon picked it up and ran with it, and he obviously took ECW way further than I ever would have taken TWA. It was all created, but Todd Gordon was an advertiser on my radio show. And so because he was an advertiser, I had him sit ringside. He was a member from the Variety Club. We used to do our shows for the Variety Club. So he would do some ring announcing, which quite frankly, he was awful at, but he was the ring announcer. Okay. And when I folded, he picked the ball up and ran with it.
Joel, let me ask you